Hyokai no Kanata, or Beyond the Boundary, is a really good romance anime. If the absolutely adorable main character isn't enough, it also has really good chemistry between the romantic leads, a feast for the eyes in the fight animations, intriguing setting and world building, a mummy talking in Kansai Ben, and the greatest filler episode you'll ever watch in your life. When I watched this show a couple years ago, I was quite impressed with what this show managed to do in only 12 episodes, and at the time, it was one of the top romance anime in my list. Until I got to the very end of the last episode, and subsequently got to the movie, that is, but we'll talk about that later. For now, just know that I'm going to get into full spoilers for this anime and its movie in this video, because I'm going to tell you how a sequel movie completely ruined Beyond the Boundary for me, which could have been so damn great. Now, before we can get into why a good thing is ruined by a bad thing, we'll first have to talk about what makes the good thing good. Look, this show isn't perfect. There were shortcomings in this show, which I mostly attribute to its short runtime. However, I believe the romance in this show more than holds up on its own. In a world filled with harmful yomu, or dream shades as they're called in the English translation, spirit hunters over the world hunt down these yomu, both for the public's safety and for a living. Our main character, Kuriyama Mirai, is special in that she comes from a clan that can use her blood as a weapon against these yomu. However, such an ability is considered a curse and have caused Mirai to become an outcast. But when she meets a half-yomu boy named Kanbara Akihito, whom we find out later she was destined to kill, Akihito tries his best to connect with her and help her get over her insecurities. Over the course of the show, we see the two of them gradually grow closer and closer together, and eventually blossom into a beautiful romance despite the odds. It's a classic tragic love story about how the main character that is destined to destroy a certain someone ends up falling in love with that certain someone, and how that love makes the main character go against their destiny and sacrifice themselves for their loved one. But what makes this show special is that because Akihito is immortal, Mirai can't just end him on sight, despite her efforts. As such, instead of seeing two people develop feelings through heated conflict like what you would see in a 12-year-old's fanfiction, what we get is the two romantic leads developing feelings for each other in relatable slice-of-life events, while having the supernatural fighting serve as catalysts for character growth. I can't say it's anything super mind-blowing or anything, but in classic KyoAni fashion, they just somehow nailed the character chemistry just right. Mirai and Akihito bounce off each other so well in the comedy, but the way they can easily relate to each other in their unique circumstances also just makes you can't help but root for them to be happy together. But as you get closer to the ending, you slowly realize that such a happy ending might be impossible for the two, given Mirai's quote-unquote destiny to kill Akihito. We even got a fake happy ending in episode 10, which was masterfully done in my opinion, where it teases you with the possibility of a happy ending for the two, only to tear it away from you anyway. It really draws out how lonely these two feel without each other, and tugs at your heartstrings with how helpless they are, despite their best efforts at fighting against the fate that was given to them. As a tragic romance story, it really is quite amazing. And I mean that quite literally, because if you look at the entirety of the show instead, you can definitely see the imperfections. This show kinda sucks as a fantasy action anime. Sure, the action is animated really nicely, but the writing itself doesn't really support the action that well. There are so many things left unexplained. How did Akihito end up being a half-yomu? How does appraising yomus work? What use is there for these yomu stones that people can get money for them? Where did the spirit hunter's power come from, and how did they get stronger? Is it simply repeated use, or is there some kind of mastery you have to achieve? If you're using a yomu as a knockoff Pokemon to help you defeat enemies, how will your own skills, like creating barriers, improve? How do these convenient as hell people repellers work? What reason did this guy have to feed Beyond the Boundary? There's just so many unanswered questions, leaving a ton of cracks in the world building. But you know what? That's fine. If this show's focus was on the yomus and how they threaten the world, then I would say the show's pretty garbage. But the thing is that it's not. It's very clear that this show is a romance show first and foremost, and that's what makes it so genius. I feel like the people behind the scenes of the anime knew that 12 episodes isn't nearly enough for the story to be about this fantastical world. So, they put most of their efforts into building the chemistry between Mirai and Akihito. The show doesn't try to be two things at once, because it knows that's biting off more than it could chew. They have decided that the focus should be on the tragic romance between the romantic leads, and I think that's a really smart move. A lot of fantasy shows try to have this complex world with incredible world building, and it's definitely great for writers that manage to pull it off, but some people aren't quite into that. Some people might be easily overwhelmed with that much information, and just want a comfy time watching characters interact with each other. For those people who also want to dip their toes into fantasy, this kind of show is perfect for them, because the fantasy world serves as a foundation for these character interactions, giving motivations for the characters to act in certain ways while not pulling the spotlight away from them. I would usually heavily criticize a show for having a villain as shallow as this guy in the show, but I really don't mind it here, because that's not the focus. I mean, he does do things that push the plot forward, but it's not like he creates the main obstacle between Mirai and Akihito, right? Whew, yeah, that was a pretty great show. The ending was heartbreaking, but sometimes that's what makes a great love story, you know? Maybe I'll go rewatch Angel Beats after wait, what the fuck? Yeah, about that ending. This is where the real problems start. For the small amount of people that have watched my video on season 3 of Danmachi, you should already know how I feel about this. Character deaths, especially main character deaths, should be something that is respected. Unless you're doing a comedy show, there's very little reason to revive a main character right after an emotional death scene, if at all. Not only does it completely undermine the emotions the audience feels from the death, but it also leaves your audience with confusion. How are we supposed to feel now? Are we supposed to feel glad because she came back? Or are we supposed to feel like our time has been wasted because all the emotional scenes before this didn't affect the outcome at all? They don't even have a good explanation for it. They just pulled that out of their asses just to have the show end on a good ending. I'm sorry, but it really doesn't work that way. You can't just write a tragic love story and have it end happily just because you want it to. If you want a good ending for Mirai and Akihito, simply don't have her disappear in the first place. You can either have Mirai disappear, making Akihito live with her sacrifice, or you can have Mirai revive right after Akihito came in to save her, having them live happily ever after. But you can't have both. However, I think this ending wouldn't have happened if they didn't need to set up for the movie sequel. And let me tell you, the movie only digs deeper, so much so that it has pretty much ruined this great story for me. Following her mysterious and unexplained revival, we find out that Mirai completely lost her memories, also in a mysterious and unexplained way. Now, I don't know how you feel about amnesiac characters, but I think making the main character lose her memories like this is the stupidest idea 99% of the time. It wouldn't make sense to maybe have her temporarily lose her memories, then have some emotional event trigger her memories back, and resulting in our two romantic leads reuniting. But that's not what happens here. For some reason, they decided to have Mirai never regain her memories. Everything she knows by the end is told to her by others. Her past, her lineage, her powers, and even her catchphrase. So, essentially, they have reset her character back to zero with this movie. This Mirai is not the Mirai we knew from the anime. As far as the story is concerned, she is a completely different character here, fully independent from who she was. When she is learning about her past, she's arguably learning about a completely different person. For all we know, she could actually be a different person, wearing the skin of Kuriyama Mirai and being gaslit into thinking she was someone she wasn't. Now that might be a cool plot point in other genres of anime, but as we've established, the anime was a romance show first and foremost. And guess what's the one thing you can't do in a romance show? You can't literally replace one of the romantic leads. Disregarding trashy wish fulfillment shows, people get invested in romance anime because they want to see the chemistry between the leads. People want to see the romantic leads grow closer and closer over time, and that's what keeps them watching. And that's why people want sequels for their favorite romance shows. But if you literally reset that growth back to zero in the sequel movie, the whole point of a sequel is gone. We are seeing Akihito build a relationship from the ground up with a completely different person, and as a fan of the original anime, that is just not what I'm looking for in the sequel. If I really wanted to see a fanfiction of Akihito ending up with someone else, I can just go to archive my own myself, or really anything else that isn't the sequel movie. Because this new Mirai possesses no personality traits of the old Mirai, not only am I completely uninterested in her, but I'm also ticked off at the fact that her existence completely disrespects Mirai's sacrifice near the end of the original show. The show is basically telling you, hey, remember how Mirai sacrificed herself for Akihito? You can forget about that now, because we have Mirai version 2.0 here, and she's the one that will get the happy ending with Akihito. And to that, I say hell no. Version 2.0 did nothing to deserve that happy ending. The one that did everything for Akihito was version 1.0, and screw you for taking that away from her and giving that to some random nobody that is 2.0. I mean, what do you mean you want to stay with him forever, Miss 2.0? You only just started to properly get to know this guy the night before, and now that he saved you once, you immediately fall in love with him just like that, like some damsel in distress? What is this, some middle schooler's romantic fantasy? As you might be able to tell from my crazed ramblings, this is a very strong opinion that I've held for quite a long time. And well, with the help of hindsight, I've come to realize that it is quite the subjective opinion. While I see Mirai 1.0 and Mirai 2.0 as different people, some might see them as the same person. Some might even consider it romantic to keep loving someone in the exact same way despite them having forgotten everything and being a new person. Even though I heavily disagree with these takes, that is ultimately still just my opinion, and I can't stop someone from enjoying that if they like it. But even if we disregard Mirai's Amnesia, even if we disregard how terrible this movie is as a sequel to a romance show, I still think it is a much worse experience than the original anime. And that's because, in a fit of genius, they decided to shift their focus from mainly romance to both romance and fantasy action. And if you've been paying attention, you'll know that this is what I refer to as biting off more than they could chew. Aside from the botched romance, the movie includes several new plot points around the other characters. I would say we can go through them in detail one by one, but in actuality, there's not nearly enough substance in each of these plot points for me to go through them like that. There's Hiromi being the new leader of his clan and how that puts pressure on him, but all that amounts to is just a few exchanges between Ayaka and Hiromi with zero conclusion at the end. There's Izumi turning evil against the main cast, but all she did was push the plot forward once by attacking Mirai, and when she's in the final fight, she literally exchanges 2 attacks with Hiromi and immediately gets pulled back into the light in the cheesiest way possible, with no conclusion at the end other than, oh yeah, she's good again. There's also Mirai, feeling worthless all over again by her lineage, which was the exact same emotional journey she went on in the original anime. Except this time, it's condensed into a few scenes at the very end of the show, providing not only something we've already seen once before, but also in lesser quality. This show was never the kind of fantasy action show that allowed for that much to happen at once, and in trying to do all that at once, we end up with ankle-deep plot points that go nowhere. You might be thinking, the original anime also had its own side plots though. Why are you shitting on the movie but not the show then? Can't you just ignore all of that and focus on the romance? And well, that's because of the biggest problem of all in the movie, the existence of a big bad villain, and he is the one responsible for shifting the focus away from the romance. In the original show, there was no big bad villain causing all the conflict. This big Yomu called Beyond the Boundary that Mirai and Akito fight together at the end doesn't really have a character, and it's more akin to a force of nature. And this guy called... Fujima Miroku doesn't really do anything major other than show up in a few fights and activate his machine or something at the end. As far as the original show is concerned, he was pretty forgettable as a character. Remember though, him being forgettable was definitely more of a good thing than bad, because that keeps the spotlight on the romance element of the show. But in the movie, he suddenly turns into the main villain of the story, revealing himself to be the cause behind literally every single event in the show by using the parasite Yomu thingies. Izumi turning evil was his doing, and so was Mirai turning on the main cast. It becomes impossible to ignore him, because the entire movie's events, including the romance elements, hinges on his actions. And when you are forced to pay attention to this guy's schemes, not only does the show's focus shift away from the romance, but it also becomes perfectly clear just how shit of a villain he is. When you have a prominent villain like this in the story, it's so important that we can understand the character. We have to know why they are doing the things that they do, because that's how we get invested in the conflict. If their motivations are shallow, then the conflict will also be just as shallow. But here, this guy drops the most generic cookie-cutter villain motivation of "nobody accepted me, so now I'm gonna kill everyone." That is almost as shallow as you can get for a villain. We don't get any backstory for him, no reason why he's so obsessed with Izumi, no explanation for how making people be consumed by the darkness benefits him. We basically don't get anything. As a villain, Miroku is, for a lack of a better term, dogshit. And remember, this wouldn't be a problem if they didn't shine such a big ass spotlight on him in the plot. More than a third of the movie was related to Miroku's schemes, in the form of Izumi doing evil things, him capturing Mirai and turning her against the main cast, and his goofy ass villain monologue. That is more than enough to tear the focus away from the romance, the actual strength of the original show, and putting part of that focus onto this fantasy villain, the much, much weaker part of the story. And you know what? It would have been perfectly fine if they wanted to shift their focus for the movie, but it has to be supported by competent writing. If they can't manage that, which I definitely think they failed here, they would have been much better off if they had just continued to focus on the romance. And like I mentioned, the shallower the villain, the shallower the conflict. The main gimmick in this conflict are the parasite Yomu thingies that can infect people. And boy, this joke of a gimmick is so shallow, the phrase plot device has never been more fitting. This parasite Yomu, quote, brings out the darkness within people, which, first of all, goddamn that's edgy as hell. To be fair though, this movie did come out in 2015. But then, the guy hits us with the, "it will possess anyone who looks at it." Brother, that is the most convenient shit ever. This is the type of move your little brother would have hit you with in one of your imaginary fights. Oh, so you wanna fight? Yeah, let's fight. Well, that's too bad, cause I've already won. Huh? I have the ability to poison anyone that looks at me. Okay, little bro, that's just cheating. I'm not playing with you anymore. But hey, what matters is how you use it, right? As long as they make a good plot out of it, that doesn't matter, right? Yeah, sorry, that's not the case here. I wasn't kidding when I said that this is as bad of a plot device as one can get. Let's see what this parasite does. First of all, it seems to boost the power level of the people it infects significantly. I mean, that's the whole reason why Izumi willingly got infected with it in the first place. But that only applies when the plot needs that to happen. One moment, Izumi folds Ayaka like an omelette off screen with seemingly power to spare. But in the next scene, she gets hit with a 1-2 parry and gets disarmed immediately. Next thing you know, she's passed out on the floor because of God knows why. And despite the teacher and Mitsuki also getting infected, they didn't seem to get any stronger. Okay, what about the whole bringing out people's darkness thing? From what is shown, it seems that before consuming people completely, bringing out someone's darkness causes them pain and hinders their movements. I mean, that's literally the only thing it does in the final fight, but okay, that's not necessarily the worst thing ever, it's just a debuff for the good guys. Why not, right? But they couldn't even do that right. After Akihito and the others got infected with the parasite, it only affects Akihito, and only him, once, at the perfect moment when he needed to realize Mirai's ring is special in some way. Why even have the parasite infect him then? If all you needed to do was to have him look at the ring, he could have tripped over some random ass pebble or something for that to happen. In fact, the parasite is such a non-factor that after Akihito somehow saves Mirai, the parasite is never mentioned anymore. Is it gone? How is it gone? Does it die when you get hit with the power of love? If that's the case, what happened to the parasites in Mitsuki and the teacher? What about all the shadow people that got consumed by the darkness? We get no answers because they seemingly just forgot about it. We were clearly meant to care about this plot device, since not only does it cause the main conflict of the movie, we also had to listen to a whole villain monologue about it. But we were blue-balled once again with it disappearing into the ether like it never even existed. I just don't get it. How do you mess up this bad? All of that, the stupid amnesia, the shallow plot points, the shitty villain, and this joke of a plot device could have all been avoided if they had just continued focusing on the romance. But nope, they decided against that. And what did we get? An unfocused mess of a movie that not only is bad by itself, but also actively undermines the original show's ending with its existence. There are still so many things I can talk about, like how did Akihito get into Mirai's mind? What does the ring do? What is the significance of the ring being made from the body of Mirai's mom? Is that beyond the boundary coming back? Why? Did it even matter? So many unanswered questions, and they expect us to just whiplash back onto the romance with a confession at the end. And while I would love to keep talking about all that, I'm starting a 6th page on the script, and I think I've rambled on for long enough about this 8-year-old movie. I just had to get this frustration off my chest, because goddamn did they get me so invested in this romance only to mess it all up. If you like listening to my crazed rambling and ranting, consider dropping a like and subscribing. And check out my streams as well, where you might be able to make me ramble some more, if you happen to mention an anime that I feel strongly about. That's it for this video. I'm tired. Bye!